At the end of last week's episode, we were just leaving Harness Creek, where we had met up with Peter outside of Annapolis, Maryland. From there, we hopped back into Chesapeake Bay and we made a long run down to the Solomons, where we anchored for a couple of days in Back Creek. From there, we hopped back into the bay and we made another long run down the Chesapeake. We crossed the mouth of the Potomac River and we anchored in our second favorite anchorage in all of the Intracoastal Waterway, and that is Mill Creek. We only stayed there one night because the weather was good, so we hopped back out into the bay and we made our way down to Jackson Creek. I guess we might as well go ahead and get right into it. Grab a drink, climb aboard, and let's get going. As we left the Annapolis, Maryland area, we were treated to a rare spot of sunshine. It was the first sun we'd probably seen in 2 or 3 days, and it was very short-lived, unfortunately. Then the rains came. There wasn't any rain projected, but you know, that doesn't stop a little rain shower from coming in, so we got treated to a little bit of rain. The bay was very calm that day, so we did have to motor all the way down to the Solomons, and once we got to the Solomons, the weather had started to break, and the weather was significantly better for the rest of our trip down the bay. Pulling into Solomons, Maryland is always a lot of fun. I know there are a ton of boating meccas all across the Chesapeake Bay. You know, Annapolis, Maryland has got to be a huge one. I've never been to the city proper, but I know there's tons of marinas there. And the Solomons has to be one of the larger ones, I would guess. Maybe it's a middle-sized one, I don't know, but it's one of the bigger ones that I go to. And there are 7 to 10 marinas, I would guess, in this area, all in this one creek. And it's a really nice protected spot. I knew I was going to be there for 3 days. There were some high winds coming into the bay. And I went to my favorite anchorage, and luckily it was open. There's a spot, it's a little further to get to. There are tons of places to anchor in Solomons, but I like staying in Back Creek. It's in a nice, quiet little residential area. It's about 9 feet deep, so it's just about the perfect depth, plenty of swing room. It's just a really nice, quiet anchorage at the end of all of the marinas. So you don't get any traffic coming through. You'll get small boats, but both offshoots of the creek past where I anchor are too shallow for any sort of a draft to get up. They're only like 3 feet deep. A catamaran could feasibly come by, but it's not very practical. So, you know, it's just a very nice, quiet, peaceful, tranquil place. It's just a great place to be. Our time in the Solomons was very pleasant. We were there for 2 or 3 days. We did a lot of grilling. We got some chores done. I did a load of laundry, and we still hadn't put everything inside of the boat away. And in the northern bay, you can get away with that. It's never going to be very rough. But once you start to progress down the bay, the weather conditions can get very rough. And we knew there was going to be wind blowing down the bay this day, and it was going to be very rolly as waves swept out up from behind us. So we wanted to have everything safe and secure inside the cabin. So it was 2 or 3 days of, you know, being at anchor, but they were working days. As we headed south down the bay, the wind and weather got even better, and the waves died down a bit. It can get a little sporty crossing the mouth of the Potomac. It is about 10 miles to get across the mouth of the river, and that takes us about 2.5 hours, and it can get really choppy. But today it was absolutely beautiful. It was the best crossing the mouth of the Potomac we'd ever had. It was very calm, and it was just a beautiful day to be out on the bay. After making it across the mouth of the Potomac, it was a sprint to Mill Creek, which is our second favorite anchorage on the East Coast, and it's our favorite anchorage in all of Chesapeake Bay. There are a ton of Mill Creeks, but this one is just south of the Potomac, and if I had to be anywhere on the East Coast during a hurricane, it would be in Mill Creek. It is wonderful there. It's got 360-degree protection. You can actually go a lot further up Mill Creek than what we do when we're anchoring normally, and the banks get steeper, so you get even more protection the deeper you go in, which is absolutely fantastic. It reminds me a lot of the lake that I grew up on as a child. It's a creek here, but back in Wisconsin, that, you know, would be called a lake. A small lake, but still a lake. So it reminds me of my childhood home. After spending just one night at Mill Creek, we made a short trip down the bay to Jackson Creek. Now, the name of the game in the fall is just get south as fast as possible. I would have loved to have stayed in Mill Creek for a few more days, and when I come back in the spring, I'll definitely stay there for a while. But You know, I've traveled enough in the cold, and quite frankly, I'm sick of it. I just want to get south. I want it to be warm during the day. I've had enough of freezing my butt off. And this day out on the bay was absolutely wonderful. We had wind coming on the beam, which is the side of the boat. It was one of the, I think it was either the front or the rear quadrant, I can't remember. And there are names for all of this stuff, you know, sailing terms. My brain just doesn't work that way. Much like remembering people's names, I can't remember the different points of sail, you know, the different directions the wind can come from. Now I know how to handle that wind, but I can't remember the name. And a lot of it is hoity-toity nonsense. It's like you can never call a rope on a boat, it's a line. And sometimes the rope is called a sheet, but never a rope. It's always a line or a sheet. Even though it's the same damn thing. They're all the same thing. It's all a bunch of madness, so I don't know, I just don't really pay any attention to that kind of stuff, but hey, at least I know what to do with it. Coming into Jackson Creek is always, it's not tricky, it's just you have to be a little careful. There's a sandbar that extends across the entire mouth of Jackson Creek, and there's one vacuumed out channel so you can get in there. And you don't want to meet another boat in there. The channel's pretty narrow. I would guess it's maybe only 20-25 feet wide. You know, two boats side by side. It might be a bit of a stretch to get through there. And thankfully you can see the entire channel, you know, so if someone's coming out, you can just wait for them before going in. So it's not, you know, it's not anything tricky. If you stay in the middle of the channel, you're totally fine. And Jackson Creek is nice. It's not necessarily protected from the wind, but it is protected from the waves. That sandbar is only about 12 inches deep at low tide, or you know, when the wind is blowing in a certain direction. So it protects the creek from any massive waves, which is wonderful. As soon as we got to Jackson Creek, I went ahead and I wanted to get a couple of chores done. We were going to be there for a few days due to high wind, so I wanted to knock these out and just get them done with. The first thing I had to do was to adjust the stuffing box, and then the second thing I wanted to do was to change the zinc anode in the heat exchanger on the diesel engine. And it's a good thing that I had to do these two things, because if I didn't do these two chores, I wouldn't have realized that for the second time I flooded the diesel engine with salt water. So there was a siphon that was being created from the exhaust, so it was sucking salt water back into the engine, so the cylinders were completely full of salt water. Now, if I hadn't realized this on the first day that we were there, if I had left salt water in the engine for 3 or 4 days, I don't know what the outcome would have been. So I covered all of this in the video where I went over both times that I flooded the engine and how I fixed it. So if you want to know more about that, I'll put a link down below in the description, but I'm not going to get into that again. So as far as this video is concerned, that never happened. So what you're looking at here is the stuffing box. Now this is the propeller shaft, so this goes from the transmission on the engine through the back of the boat, and just on the other side of the fiberglass at the back of the screen there is where the propeller is. And this seals the outside environment from the inside environment. So there are two parts of the stuffing box. It's just those two little nuts. The one that's closest to us is the packing nut, I believe they call it, and then the one a little further back is the locking nut. Now that packing nut has some Teflon, I don't even know what they call it, Teflon packing, I guess. And it's just like a little rope that goes around there, and that seals the shaft so that water doesn't come from the outside environment in. And then the locking nut keeps the packing nut in place, and you can adjust it. So you'll see there's a little drip coming out, and that cools the packing material so you don't burn a hole in your shaft, causing a larger leak. And so it just helps keep everything cool, that little trickle of water, so the seal will remain intact. Now you don't want it to drip too much, because that gets down into the bilge and can create a bunch of bio life, which you can see back there. There's a lot of organics growing. I need to get back there and clean that out. But you do want sufficient water to be coming through so that it can, you know, be cool and everything. And the proper way to adjust it is to do a temperature offset. So I'll adjust it, and I know the drip rate, so Initially it was dripping probably once every, maybe even twice a second. It was a pretty steady stream coming out of there, and it only needs to drip on this one maybe about once every 15 seconds. So I've done the test where I will dial in that drip rate and then I'll do a temperature differential. So after you're done running, they say that the temperature differential between the outside water and the stuffing box itself should be within 30 degrees. And I'd like to keep it closer to 15 degrees just to be safe, so I'm not heating anything up. So that once one drip every 15 or so seconds seems to lock in that temperature offset that I like. So just adjusting it actually just squeezes the when you loosen or tighten the stuffing box, it just squeezes that packing into the back of that collar there, and that just adjusts the flow rate, and then the locking nut keeps that in place so it doesn't loosen as the propeller shaft turns. And as you can see here, I was struggling with it a little bit. This is a hard spot to get back into. I am a large person, both around and tall, and squeezing back there is a little difficult. And I think my packing is getting pretty worn out, so next time I get hauled out, I'm definitely going to change that packing. It took a little while to get it adjusted properly this time, and it shouldn't be that difficult. So I think it's time to change out the packing. And the other chore I wanted to complete was to change out the zinc on the heat exchanger. Now, I had just changed out the zinc not too long before we made it back to Delaware City, so I knew it was still good, but I wanted to just change it out and start with a fresh one so I would know where it was at and I wouldn't have to worry about it. Now, this is a zinc anode, so the heat exchanger, I'm not exactly sure what it's made out of. It's either, I would guess, copper for heat transference or stainless for corrosivity, one or the other. I'm guessing it's either copper or stainless, but both will corrode with prolonged contact to salt water. So the raw water runs through the heat exchanger and the coolant in the engine runs through the heat exchanger, and then they exchange heat, and the waste heat gets taken away from the engine through the exhaust. So the anode, or the zinc anode, gets corroded. It either has a higher or a lower electrical potential than the material the heat exchanger is made out of. I can't remember which one it is. Chemistry class was a long time ago, and Hanwi is throwing a treat at me. Are you okay, Wubble? Did you want to come back in? Oh, okay. Hold on, I gotta get the Wubble. Come on in. Come on, P-Dubs. I got you. Come on, princess. I got you, pretty. There you go. Did you want that treat you threw at me? Yeah, there it is. Apologies for that. But anyway, so the zinc gets sacrificed. Now, I do have to change it. I change it, or I check it when I change the oil on the engine, which is every 100 hours that the engine is running. But you do have to be careful because the zinc is consumed even when you're sitting still. So when we're in Florida, hanging out at Matanzas Inlet for 2 weeks, that zinc is still being consumed, whereas the engine hours are not running on your engine. So there are two different, I'll check it once every 2 weeks if we're stationary, and then I'll check it once every 100 engine hours as well. So once that zinc pencil gets about halfway consumed, you do have to change it, because replacing a heat exchanger, if any corrosion happens there, is very expensive. I can't remember what Frank said he paid. I think he bought a new heat exchanger not too long before he sold it, and I'm just trying to remember. I believe he said it was somewhere around $1,600. So the heat exchangers are not the cheapest thing in the world, whereas a zinc pencil's like $5. So it's much better to change out the zinc. And that's all we have time for this week. I would like to give a massive shout out to my Patreon crew. Without your guys' support, I wouldn't make these videos. And my Patreon crew is Joan and Juddy Judnick, Val and Chris Alcorn, Denise and Eli Sackett, Sherry Erickson, Deb Shaw, Matthew Spotton, Peter Allen, and Natalie Linehan. Thank you guys so very much. Your support really means the world to me. I do have one legacy patron member, and her name is Joan Linbo. Unfortunately, she has passed on, but she lives on in our hearts forever. We really miss you, Joan. If you are interested in joining our Patreon crew, there is a link in the description down below, and that'll take you to our Patreon page where you can sign up. And there are hundreds, literally hundreds of extra videos and photos of our travels, and I try and keep everything there up to date and post at least once or twice a week, so it gives you a little peek behind the curtain. If you do like our videos, please like, comment, and subscribe. That'll help us out more than you'll ever know, and that actually doesn't cost you anything, so hit that like button. Alrighty, I hope you all are well, and we'll see you next week.